At first glance, it might sound like the plot of a romance novel, but life has a way of turning even the most thrilling stories into something far more complicated. Martha Evans, a self-made millionaire in her mid-50s, had everything that most people could only dream of: wealth, success, a stunning house, and a reputation as a powerful businesswoman. Martha Evans was a woman who exuded confidence and elegance, standing tall as a beacon of success in the world of business. In her mid-50s, she had built a real estate empire from scratch, conquering markets that many thought were beyond her reach. Her mind was sharp, her instincts even sharper, and her reputation impeccable. She had a lavish house perched on the city's most exclusive street, a collection of luxury cars that would make any enthusiast envious, and enough wealth to buy whatever her heart desired. Yet, despite her immense wealth, a quiet emptiness lingered beneath the surface, a void that no amount of money, houses, or apartments could fill. Martha, for all her success, had always been alone. Years ago, she made a choice that shaped the rest of her life. She sacrificed love for her career. Back then, she was deeply in love with a man named David. They were inseparable, sharing dreams and aspirations that made every moment exciting and full of hope. But when the opportunity to expand her business came knocking, Martha couldn't resist. David, however, wasn't ready to leave everything behind and relocate, choosing instead to stay and pursue his own dreams. With a heavy heart, Martha walked away, convinced that focusing on her wealth and career would be worth it in the long run. She achieved what she set out for: a thriving career, an enviable lifestyle, but the joy she imagined never materialized. Now, decades later, she wondered if the cost had been too high. Was it worth it? Was the excitement of a growing empire enough to replace the warmth of a genuine connection? One evening, while reviewing a new proposal in her high-rise office, Martha noticed a young man passionately presenting his ideas in the boardroom next door. Jason Monroe, newly hired and brimming with confidence, captured her attention immediately. He moved with purpose, his voice strong and assertive, and his ideas were unconventional but undeniably brilliant. Watching him stirred something inside Martha, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. There was something magnetic about his presence, a reminder of the boldness she had when she was younger. She found herself curious, almost enchanted by his dynamic energy. Over the weeks that followed, Martha started paying closer attention to Jason's work. He had a knack for turning complex problems into simple, innovative solutions, making even the most mundane tasks seem exciting. His approach to the market was fearless, and his suggestions often led to unexpected but lucrative results. His mind, full of fresh perspectives and strategic brilliance, intrigued Martha more than she was willing to admit. She invited him for a one-on-one meeting, curious to understand the man behind the ideas. During their conversation, Martha was struck by his passion and his unrelenting drive. It reminded her of herself when she first started out, ambitious, daring, and unwilling to settle for anything less than greatness. Jason, on the other hand, saw Martha as more than just a boss. To him, she was a figure of inspiration, someone who had achieved everything he aspired to. He admired her resilience, her wisdom, and her keen understanding of the business world. Their conversations were engaging and intense, filled with debates about market strategies, investment opportunities, and the future of technology. But beneath the professional exchanges, there was an unspoken connection, a spark that grew stronger with every interaction. Martha tried to convince herself that it was purely professional respect, yet the more time she spent around Jason, the more she felt drawn to him. He made her feel alive again, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. One late night, after hours of discussing a particularly challenging project, Jason suggested grabbing dinner to continue brainstorming. To Martha's surprise, she agreed. Over a modest meal at a quiet bistro, their conversation shifted from business to personal stories. Jason spoke about his upbringing, his dreams and his struggles, his blue eyes sparkling with passion as he recounted tales of overcoming adversity. Martha listened intently, captivated by his vulnerability and depth. He wasn't just a brilliant mind, he was a person with a complex story, one filled with drama, suffering, and hope. By the time the evening ended, Martha realized she was looking at Jason differently, not as a colleague, but as a man who had sparked something within her heart. The more they talked, the more Martha felt herself softening, her guarded exterior crumbling piece by piece. Jason had a way of making her feel understood and seen in a way that no one else had. He didn't treat her like the powerful CEO or the wealthy woman with money and influence. To him, she was just Martha, a person with dreams, regrets, and a yearning for something real. She tried to brush it off, to remind herself of the age gap, the impropriety, the potential fallout, but her resolve weakened every time he smiled at her. There was something intoxicating about the way he looked at her, as if she was the only person in the room who mattered. Their connection didn't go unnoticed by others. Whispers began circulating around the office, speculating about the nature of their relationship. Some saw it as nothing more than a mentorship, while others whispered that Martha was using her position to indulge in a fling. But they were wrong. It was deeper than that, more complicated, more fragile. Martha found herself navigating uncharted territory, torn between the excitement of a newfound romance and the fear of losing everything she had worked so hard to build. For the first time in years, she didn't know what the right decision was. Should she continue, or should she let go before things got too messy? Late one night, as Martha stood in front of her floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city skyline, she couldn't help but think of David. He, too, had been full of dreams and ambition, and she had let him go in pursuit of her own goals. Was she repeating the same mistake, falling for someone she couldn't have, or was this different? With Jason, the feelings were stronger, more intense, as if life had given her a second chance at something she didn't even know she was missing. Her thoughts were a jumble of confusion and longing, pulling her in different directions. But Jason wasn't David. He was a man of his own making, strong-willed and clear about what he wanted, and it was obvious that he wanted her. Yet, a nagging voice in the back of Martha's mind kept warning her of the potential fallout. Age was just a number, but society had a way of turning such relationships into scandals. She knew the risks, yet each time Jason's hand brushed against hers, she felt herself leaning closer. Their story was just beginning, but with every step forward, the stakes grew higher, and Martha, for the first time in a long while, felt the thrill of not knowing what would come next. The relationship between Martha and Jason began to deepen, slowly but unmistakably, shifting from professional admiration to something much more complex. It was like watching a story unfold in slow motion, each shared moment adding another layer of intensity to their connection. Martha found herself looking forward to their late-night strategy sessions, where work seamlessly transitioned into personal conversations. Jason's presence was electric, his enthusiasm for every idea contagious. He would lean in closer when they discussed the market's latest trends, his eyes sparkling with excitement, making Martha feel young again. Every glance, every accidental touch carried a weight that words couldn't capture, filling the air between them with a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. One weekend, in a rare break from their hectic schedules, Jason invited Martha to join him for a casual day out, a walk along the lake, far from the hustle and bustle of the office. It was their first real date, though neither dared call it that. They strolled side by side, talking about everything except work. Jason opened up about his past, sharing snippets of his childhood and the struggles of growing up without a father. He told her about his mother, a resilient woman who raised him single-handedly, instilling in him the values of hard work and perseverance. Listening to him, Martha felt a strange pang of recognition, as if parts of his story mirrored her own lonely journey. As he spoke, a familiar name slipped through his lips. David. Martha's heart skipped a beat. It was a common enough name, she told herself, but something in the way Jason described his father's sudden departure felt too familiar. He recounted how his father, a driven businessman, had left their family when Jason was just a boy, chasing after some grand career opportunity. He spoke with a mix of longing and resentment, a young boy's yearning for a father's presence, mingled with the bitterness of abandonment. Martha's chest tightened as memories of her own David came rushing back, the man who had left her behind to pursue his ambitions, disappearing from her life without a trace. But no, it couldn't be the same person. What were the odds? As their days together stretched into weeks, Martha found herself falling deeper. Jason was everything she had wanted, smart, passionate, and full of a hope she had long since buried. He challenged her in ways no one else dared to, pushing her to rethink her decisions, to question her path. With him, she felt alive, as if rediscovering the parts of herself she had left behind in the pursuit of wealth and status. But as her feelings grew stronger, so did her unease. There was a familiarity in Jason's mannerisms, a subtle echo of someone she had known long ago. She brushed it off, focusing instead on the joy of their newfound connection. But the past has a way of catching up. At a grand gala held to celebrate a new partnership, Martha's world was turned upside down. Dressed in a gown that radiated elegance, she stood by Jason's side, feeling more alive and daring than she had in years. The evening was perfect, until a figure from her past walked through the doors. David. His presence hit her like a punch to the gut. He looked older, his once youthful face lined with years of experience and regret. But his eyes, the same piercing blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for decades, hadn't changed. Martha felt her breath catch in her throat. What was he doing here? Their eyes locked across the crowded room, and in that instant, everything else faded away. Memories of their shared past flooded back. Late-night talks, whispered dreams, and the painful day they had parted ways. David approached slowly, a small, tentative smile on his lips. "Martha," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "It's been a long time." The years melted away, leaving only the pain of what could have been. But Martha wasn't the same woman she had been all those years ago. She stood taller, prouder, with a life she had built on her own terms. And beside her, Jason watched with a furrowed brow, sensing the weight of the moment, but not fully understanding. The conversation was strained, polite on the surface, but underneath it crackled with unresolved tension. David glanced at Jason, his gaze lingering a moment too long. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone casual, but Martha could see the wheels turning in his mind. She introduced Jason, her voice steady even as her heart raced. Jason extended a hand, smiling politely, oblivious to the storm brewing between them. "Nice to meet you," he said warmly. David took his hand, his expression unreadable, but Martha saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. She felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. What was David hiding? Later that evening, David pulled Martha aside, his face drawn and serious. "We need to talk," he insisted. The hallway was empty, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind them. Martha crossed her arms, a defensive gesture she hadn't used in years. "What is it, David?" she asked, her voice sharp. He hesitated, then looked her straight in the eye. "Jason, he's my son." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Martha stared at him, stunned into silence. "What?" The word came out as a whisper, disbelief and confusion crashing over her like a tidal wave. David took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I had a child after we parted ways. I never told you. He broke off, shaking his head. "I didn't want to complicate things, but now—" Jason. Jason was David's son, the man she had fallen for, the one who made her believe in love again, was the child of the man she had left behind. Martha felt the room spin around her. It couldn't be true, it was impossible. But deep down, a part of her knew. She had sensed something from the beginning, the uncanny familiarity, the echoes of the past in his words. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why are you telling me this now?" she demanded, her voice trembling. David ran a hand through his hair, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because Jason, he doesn't know." Martha's heart ached as she looked at David, seeing the pain and guilt etched into his features. This was the man she had loved, the man she had walked away from, and now his son, their son, in a twisted, heartbreaking way, was the one who had reignited the fire in her soul. What was she supposed to do? How could she face Jason, knowing that their love was built on a foundation of secrets and lies? David reached out, his hand hovering just inches from hers. "Please, Martha, don't tell him. Let me do it. He needs to hear it from me." Martha pulled away, shaking her head. "This isn't just about you, David. It's about both of us." As she returned to the party, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had learned, Jason caught her eye, his smile bright and full of the hope she had cherished so much. He gestured for her to join him, but Martha hesitated. How could she go on pretending that everything was normal? She forced a smile, crossing the room to stand beside him, but the warmth between them felt like a cruel joke. Martha's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. each one more painful than the last. What was she supposed to do now? How could she tell Jason the truth without breaking both of their hearts? The night dragged on, every second stretching into an eternity. Martha knew that the next move would change everything. She had a choice to make, but none of the options felt right. Should she confront Jason, shattering the fragile happiness they had built? Or should she step back, letting David handle it, hoping against hope that things could somehow be salvaged? As the music played softly in the background, Martha stood at a crossroads, the future uncertain and terrifying. The next day, Martha sat in her office, staring blankly at her desk. The weight of the revelation from the previous night hung heavy over her, suffocating her thoughts. She had hardly slept, tossing and turning as a storm of emotions raged within her. How was she supposed to break the news to Jason? He deserved to know the truth, but how could she look him in the eyes and tell him that their love was tainted by a past neither of them could change? Just as she was about to pick up the phone and call him, her office door swung open. Jason stood there, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Martha, we need to talk," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Her heart skipped a beat. Had David told him already? The thought sent a chill down her spine. "Jason, she began, but he cut her off, stepping closer. "No, let me speak first," he insisted, his eyes searching hers. "I talked to my father last night." The words were like a punch to the gut. Martha's breath caught in her throat. So, he knew. David had gone behind her back and told Jason, shattering the fragile hope she had clung to. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jason's gaze softened as he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. "I know everything," he murmured, "and I need to understand why you didn't tell me." The room seemed to spin as Martha struggled to find the right words. "Jason, I didn't know," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I didn't know you were his son until last night. If I had known, She broke off, tears filling her eyes. Jason's expression shifted, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "You didn't know," he repeated slowly, as if trying to process her words. Martha nodded, biting her lip to keep from crying. "David never told me he had a son. I didn't know until he showed up at the gala." Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. Jason stared at her, his jaw clenched, his mind racing. "So, you're saying this wasn't some twisted game? You didn't know who I was?" Martha shook her head fiercely, desperation etched into every line of her face. "No, Jason, I swear I didn't know. I never would have." Her voice broke, and she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Jason took a deep breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "This is insane," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "I fell in love with a woman who used to love my father. What are the odds?" He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken. "How does something like this even happen?" Martha flinched at the pain in his voice. Every word felt like a dagger twisting in her chest. "Jason, please," she whispered, stepping closer. "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Jason's eyes flashed with anger. "Then why didn't you tell me the moment you found out?" he demanded. Martha recoiled, her heart aching at the fury in his gaze. "Because I didn't know what to do," she admitted quietly. "I was scared of losing you, of losing what we had. I didn't want to destroy everything." Jason stared at her, his expression torn between anger and heartbreak. "But you did," he whispered. "You kept it from me. You lied to me, Martha. How am I supposed to trust you after this?" His words cut through her like a blade, and for a moment all she could do was stand there, trembling, as tears slid down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Jason. I love you, and I—" Jason turned away sharply, his shoulders tense. "Don't!" he interrupted, his voice strained. "Don't say that right now." He paced across the room, his mind whirling with the enormity of it all. Martha, the woman who had become his world, was connected to his father in ways he couldn't comprehend. Everything felt like a cruel joke, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "What am I supposed to do?" he muttered, his voice thick with pain. "How am I supposed to deal with this?" Martha watched him, her heart breaking with every word. She wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him that it didn't matter, that their love was real despite everything. But she knew that would be a lie. The past was too tangled, too complicated, to simply wish away. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "I don't know what we're supposed to do, but I do know that I love you, Jason. That's the only thing I'm certain of." Jason stopped, his back to her, his shoulders slumping. "And what about my father?" he asked quietly. What happens to him in all of this? Martha swallowed hard, the weight of the question crushing her. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know. Jason turned slowly, his eyes haunted. Do you still love him? The question hung in the air, raw and painful. Martha felt her throat tighten. How could she answer that? David had been her first love, the man who had shaped so much of who she was. But Jason was her present, her future, the man who made her believe in love again. I don't know, she said finally, the words tearing at her. I don't know if I ever stopped loving him, but I know that I love you, Jason. I know that you're the one I want. Jason stared at her, his gaze unreadable. But you're connected, he whispered. You and my father. How am I supposed to just accept that? Martha stepped forward, her hands trembling. I don't expect you to, she murmured. I don't expect you to do anything. All I want is for you to know the truth, to know that I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. Jason, he closed his eyes, his jaw clenched tight. I need time, he said hoarsely. I need to figure out what all of this means. Martha nodded slowly, her heart shattering. I understand, she whispered. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting. Jason looked at her, his eyes dark with pain. Don't wait for me, he said softly. I can't promise you anything right now. With those words, he turned and walked out of her office, leaving Martha standing there, alone and broken. She sank into her chair, her hands shaking. She had lost him. The man she had fought so hard to keep, the love she had dared to believe in, was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the door clicked shut behind him, Martha buried her face in her hands, the weight of her choices crushing her. What had she done? How had everything gone so wrong? The only thing she knew for certain was that, no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Martha spent the next few days in a haze, the echoes of Jason's pained words replaying in her mind. She threw herself into work, trying to drown out the turmoil that raged within her. Meetings, negotiations, and market strategies. She tackled everything with a cold, mechanical efficiency, but the vibrant energy that Jason had sparked within her was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Each time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt with a fleeting hope, only to sink when she realized it wasn't him. She missed him desperately, the way he made her laugh, the way he challenged her, the way he saw her not just as a successful CEO, but as a woman with dreams and vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Jason struggled to come to terms with the truth. He avoided his father's calls, unwilling to face the man who had shattered his world twice, once by leaving him, and now by keeping this colossal secret. Instead, he found himself wandering aimlessly through the city, his thoughts a chaotic mix of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. How could he reconcile his love for Martha with the knowledge that she had once loved his father? How could he trust either of them when the foundation of their relationship felt like a cruel lie? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Martha's tearful face, heard her voice breaking as she confessed her love for him. Was it real, or had she just been clinging to a shadow of her past? One evening, after days of silence, Jason finally picked up the phone and called his father. The conversation was tense, filled with accusations and bitter words. Why didn't you tell me? Jason demanded, his voice trembling with anger. Why didn't you ever mention her? David's sigh echoed through the line, heavy with regret. I wanted to protect you, he murmured. From what? Jason shot back. From the truth? From the fact that you abandoned me and then fell in love with a woman who he broke off, his voice choked with emotion. I fell in love with her, Dad. And you didn't think I deserved to know? David was silent for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said softly. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, Jason. But by the time I realized what was going on between you two, it was too late. I didn't know how to fix it. Jason clenched his fists, his heart aching with a pain he couldn't put into words. You lied to me, he whispered. You both lied to me. David's voice was thick with emotion. I was scared, Jason. Scared that if you found out, you'd walk away, and I couldn't lose you again. Jason's chest tightened. Well, congratulations, he said bitterly. You got what you were afraid of. But despite his anger, Jason couldn't bring himself to cut his father out completely. There was a part of him, a small wounded child deep inside, that still longed for his father's approval, for the bond they had never truly shared. And so, reluctantly, He agreed to meet. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the air thick with unspoken words. David looked older than Jason remembered, the lines of guilt and sorrow etched deep into his face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," David said quietly, his gaze fixed on the table. "But I'm asking for a chance to be the father I should have been." Jason stared at him, the conflicting emotions warring within him. He thought of Martha, alone in her office, her face pale and drawn. She had given him up to repair the damage between him and his father, sacrificing her own happiness for his sake. It hurt like hell, but he couldn't deny that her actions had been driven by love. Real, selfless love. And if Martha could make such a sacrifice, then maybe, just maybe, he could find it in himself to give his father a second chance. Taking a deep breath, Jason nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said honestly, "but I'll try." The words lifted a weight off David's shoulders. He looked at his son, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "That's all I'm asking for," he whispered. They spent the next few hours talking, not just about the past, but about everything. Jason's childhood, his ambitions, his fears. For the first time in years, Jason felt a flicker of hope that maybe they could build something out of the ruins of their broken relationship. But even as he tried to bridge the gap with his father, his thoughts kept drifting back to Martha. What was she doing? Was she thinking of him too? Did she regret letting him go, or was she relieved to have put the whole mess behind her? Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, Jason made a decision. He needed to see her. He needed to know if there was still a chance for them, if the love they had shared could survive the truth. With his heart pounding in his chest, he drove to her house, his mind racing with what he would say. When he arrived, he hesitated at the door, suddenly unsure. What if she turned him away? What if she had already moved on? But he had to try. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. A few moments later, the door swung open, and there she was, Martha, standing in the dim light of the hallway, her expression a mix of shock and longing. "Jason," she breathed, her voice soft and hesitant. He took a step forward, his gaze locked on hers. "Martha, He broke off, struggling to find the right words. How could he sum up everything he was feeling? The confusion, the anger, the love. "I miss you," he said finally, his voice raw. "I don't know what to do or what this means, but I miss you." Martha's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "I miss you too," she whispered. For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them thick with unshed emotions. Then slowly, Jason pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I don't know if we can fix this," he murmured, his voice muffled against her hair, "but I want to try." Martha's breath hitched, her heart swelling with hope. "So do I," she whispered. They stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, the pain of the past still lingering, but no longer insurmountable. They had a long road ahead of them, a road filled with difficult conversations and painful memories. But for the first time since the truth had come out, Martha felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make it work. Over the next few weeks, Jason balanced rebuilding his relationship with his father and cautiously rekindling his romance with Martha. It wasn't easy. Every conversation with David felt like navigating a minefield, and every moment with Martha was tinged with the shadow of what they had lost. But they were trying, and sometimes that was enough. They took things slowly, meeting for coffee instead of dinner, talking about the mundane details of their lives instead of diving into the heavy emotions that simmered beneath the surface. It was awkward and painful and beautiful all at once, and it made Jason realize just how much he still wanted her in his life. Martha, for her part, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Jason to decide that it was all too much and walk away for good. But he didn't. He stayed, and little by little, the fragile threads of their relationship began to mend. There were no grand declarations, no promises of forever, just two people trying to make sense of the mess they had found themselves in. And somehow, that was enough. Months passed, and slowly but surely, the tangled web of Martha, Jason, and David's relationship began to unravel into something more bearable, something almost resembling peace. Jason had forgiven his father, or at least as much as one could forgive a man who had caused so much pain. The wounds were still there, the scars raw and aching, but they were no longer festering. They spent more time together, not as strangers, but as father and son, cautiously rebuilding a relationship that had long been lost. And through it all, Jason's feelings for Martha remained, complex, powerful, and deeply rooted in a love that refused to fade. One afternoon, Jason sat across from David at a quiet cafe, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. "I think we're okay now," he said slowly, looking at his father. David's gaze softened, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes. "Yeah," he agreed quietly. "I think so too." There was a long pause, filled with the weight of everything they had been through. Then Jason leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "But I still love her, Dad," he confessed softly. "I can't just walk away from her." David nodded slowly, his expression resigned. "I know," he murmured. "I could see it from the beginning. You're just like me, Jason. When you love deeply. And I think that's why you need to go to her." Jason stared at him, taken aback. "What are you saying?" David smiled sadly. "I'm saying I don't want to be the reason you lose her. Not again." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it rested on Jason's arm. "Go to her, Jason. If you still want to be with her, then go." Jason's heart pounded in his chest, the enormity of the decision weighing heavily on him. He had thought about it 1,000 times, what it would mean to try again, to see if they could rebuild something from the ashes of their past. And here was his father, the man who had once stood between them, giving him permission to go. The next morning, Jason found himself standing outside Martha's office, his nerves a tangled mess. Taking a deep breath, he knocked softly. "Come in," her voice called, and he stepped inside, his heart racing. Martha looked up from her desk, her eyes widening in surprise. "Jason," she breathed, her voice a mix of hope and apprehension. He swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving hers. "I needed to see you," he said quietly. "There's something I need to say." Martha's heart pounded as she stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jason took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you, Martha, and I don't want to lose you." The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Martha's eyes filled with tears, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and fear. "But what about everything that happened?" she whispered. "What about your father? What about us?" Jason stepped closer, his gaze intense. "We'll figure it out," he murmured. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try if you are." Martha stared at him, her chest tight with 1,000 emotions. She had convinced herself that this chapter was closed, that they had moved past the possibility of a future together. But here he was, offering her a second chance at the love she thought she had lost. Slowly, she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm willing to try," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jason's face broke into a smile, and before she knew it, he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close. "We'll take it one step at a time," he murmured against her hair. "No expectations, no pressure, just us." Martha clung to him, the warmth of his embrace chasing away the loneliness that had haunted her for so long. "Just us," she echoed softly. For a long moment they simply held each other, savoring the feeling of being together again. They decided to start over, building their relationship anew, free from the shadows of the past. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the old fears and insecurities threatened to tear them apart. But each time, they chose to stay. They chose to talk, to listen, to understand. And slowly, bit by bit, the fractures in their relationship began to heal. They spent more time together, long walks in the park, quiet dinners at home, and endless conversations that stretched late into the night. They laughed, they cried, and sometimes they simply sat in silence, content just to be in each other's presence. David, for his part, stayed in the background, giving them the space they needed to find their way back to each other. He watched from a distance, a bittersweet smile on his lips, as he saw his son and the woman he had once loved finding happiness again. It hurt, of course it did. But it was a good kind of hurt, the kind that came from knowing that despite everything, they had all come out stronger in the end. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, David picked up his phone and dialed Martha's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice soft and warm. "David," she said, a hint of surprise in her tone. "Is everything okay?" David took a deep breath, the words catching in his throat. I wanted to thank you," he murmured, "for everything, for giving Jason a chance, for helping us find each other again." There was a pause. Then Martha's voice came through, gentle and understanding. "You don't need to thank me, David," she said softly. We all made mistakes, but we're here now, and that's what matters. David smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. Yeah, he whispered, that's what matters. They talked for a few more minutes, exchanging updates on their lives. It was simple, easy. Two people who had once been in love, now bound by a shared history and a mutual desire for each other's happiness. When they hung up, David sat back staring out at the city lights. He had lost Martha long ago, but now he could see that what they had once shared had led to something beautiful. Jason was happy. Martha was happy, and that, more than anything, gave him peace. Meanwhile, Jason and Martha continued to grow closer, their bond stronger than ever. They were no longer defined by the mistakes of the past, but by the love and respect they had built in the present. They moved in together, slowly merging their lives in a way that felt natural and right. There were still challenges, of course, moments of doubt, moments when the past threatened to rear its ugly head, but each time they chose each other. In the end, they realized that love wasn't about finding the perfect person. It was about choosing to stay even when things got messy. It was about forgiveness, about growth, about building something beautiful out of broken pieces, and that's exactly what they did. Jason and Martha's love story wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was theirs, and that, more than anything, was enough. What would you do if you were in Martha's shoes? Would you risk everything to hold onto a love that feels almost impossible? Or would you step back for the sake of someone else's happiness? And what about Jason? Can you imagine discovering that the woman you fell in love with had such a deep connection to your own father? Life has a way of testing us with choices that seem too painful to make, but sometimes it's the choices we avoid that shape our futures the most. Do you think Martha made the right decision? Could there be a happy ending when love, family and regret are so tightly woven together? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe love should conquer all, or are there some lines that should never be crossed? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more complex and emotional journeys like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Remember, every story has two sides, and sometimes the most dramatic comebacks happen where we least expect them.